Good afternoon, and a warm welcome to St. Peter Mancroft Church, to everyone in person and online. This week we are continuing our Lent course discussions on discipleship as improvisation, and we're looking at the theme of blocking. Welcome to this second of 5 sessions of this course, in which we continue our exploration of Christian discipleship. This course is offered as part of the Heart Edge network, which was started at the Church of St. Martin's in the Fields in London, and draws upon a book written by its vicar, Sam Wells. The book is called Improvisation, and, as we discovered in our first session, Sam asks us to imagine a worldview in which God and the life of creation are like a 5-act play, an overarching theological drama. In one sense, this drama is written by God, with Jesus Christ at its heart, but not every word or action is fully scripted. Rather, we as actors within this great drama must always be improvising, so as to join in with God's unfolding purposes. As Sam Wells explains, this feels like a risky and even dangerous undertaking. He illustrates this with reference to the simple verbal improvisation game called Word at a Time, as he writes. The game begins with the actors sitting in a circle. One actor says a single word. This becomes the first word of the story. The actor next in the circle follows immediately with a second word. The next actor says a third, and so on, as quickly as possible, until the story is considered complete. Adverbs are disallowed in order to try to keep up the pace and avoid delaying tactics. Inexperienced actors invariably try to control the story, but this only succeeds in ruining it. Every person who adds a word has an incipient story in mind, and thus an idea of what word might follow. But each time he or she must instantly wipe that idea out of the mind, or else he or she will be paralyzed. If the players relax, cease to worry about being obvious, remain highly attentive, and simply say whatever comes to mind, they will find the story seems to take on a life of its own, guided by some outside force. The reason improvisation seems impossible to inexperienced players is that instinctively they spend most of their time trying to avoid being dangerous. The story constantly threatens to become obscene, psychotic, or unoriginal. These all represent danger. Thus, there is a constant, irresistible temptation to kill the story. This can be done reactively by saying stop or remaining silent, or proactively by trying to control its future, insisting on being clever or original, or closing it abruptly whenever its direction threatens danger. In the game, Word at a Time, each word is both a response to an offer and immediately an offer in itself. Offers are not to be regarded as good or bad in themselves. The key is what you do with them. One response is to block. Blocking prevents the action from developing. It undermines one's partner's premise. It may be amusing to watch, but it kills the story. It happens when one actor is overwhelmed by the danger or difficulty of keeping the story going. Blocking sees the future as a problem. All sorts of possibilities are ruled out by blocking, which arises from a sense that the whole game is improper, that rather than face its dangers and difficulties, it would be better not to play at all. There are, after all, people who would prefer to say no, and they are doubtless rewarded by the safety they attain. Blocking may seem to be the simplest way to keep one's hands clean, not to get involved in anything dangerous or improper. But it goes much further than that. Blocking undermines the other. It refuses to share space and time. It denies outcomes from which all can benefit. It assumes rivalry and enacts conflict in which there cannot be two winners, and most often, all are losers. It's at least subtly, and sometimes overtly, aggressive. It presumes violence. The times when the church is tempted to block are exactly the times when it is called to deny itself, take up its cross, and follow Christ. For this response, the way of the cross was Christ's engagement with evil, and his temptations to block were at least as strong as those of the church. The choice of blocking can therefore be either passive or active. It is either a choice to shut oneself away and keep oneself unsullied by the world, or it is a choice to take up arms. The passive choice represents a denial of the goodness of God's creation. It represents a refusal to engage with the complex realities of Christian discipleship. It reflects a denial of the redemption of all created things in Christ's resurrection. It assumes that heaven has walls, locks, and barricades. It speaks of an absence of hope. The active choice is the choice of violence. This choice makes significant assumptions about God's power and about the church's power. The assumption it makes about God is that he has not already acted, that Christ has not already decisively defeated evil in his life, death, and resurrection. Thus, the church acts as if it were Israel in Act 2 of the great drama, waiting for God to rend the heavens and come down, and in the meantime, striving to secure his kingdom by all means possible. And sometimes, the church acts as if it were in Act 5, taking upon itself the task of judgment and assigning to itself the responsibility to impose the kingdom. Sam Wells goes on to explain how when the church engages in blocking in these ways, it paradoxically falls into greater danger, even though it thinks it is acting to avoid danger. By taking up the power to block forcefully, the church accommodates itself to the methods of aggressive force and paints itself as a high-status organisation in worldly terms. It also falls into the trap of thinking that unless it acts to force the future to turn out right, it will undoubtedly turn out wrong. While blocking may appear to be faithful resilience, it in fact betrays a lack of trust in God's bigger narrative. All too often, blocking, which is intended to avoid a bad outcome, results in something worse. By getting in the way of the story, blocking is therefore ultimately sinful, and a closing off of grace. Towards the end of his book, Samuel considers at one point the huge challenges that arise when a loved one has a profound mental disability or a chronic debilitating illness. He asks what the language of faithful improvisation might mean in such situations. As part of this, he describes what blocking could involve. One block, refusal to improvise, is to seek to bring such a life to a quick end, the language of euthanasia or assisted dying. But, as Sam Wells explains, there are other kinds of blocking, especially when it comes to a severe mental disability. He says, in a success and independence-orientated culture, it is easy for intellectual disability to be seen as an evil that needs to be eliminated. Sometimes the severely mentally disabled are kept out of public sight, in institutions, often geographically secluded. Another approach is to dispose of those whose difference is intolerable. He suggests a third blocking approach is to assume there is no difference between the mentally disabled and the rest of society, to obscure any suggestion to the contrary by means of euphemisms such as differently abled, and that each of these approaches represents a failure to cope with difference. More subtle still is the blocking that is disguised as piety, based on a notion of a soul that thrives in contradiction to the damaged brain and resultant incapacity to make sense or communicate with the world. Sam Wells goes on to suggest two further kinds of blocking in such circumstances: the avoidance strategy of merely humbly recognizing that others are worse off than oneself, and even laughter, which can have the aim of avoiding the need to express grief. In sum, the world is full of blocking strategies, as is the life of the church. It is easy to persuade oneself that blocking is humane, sensible, and worldly wise. However, implicit within Sam Wells' description is the hope that other possibilities also exist. A short summary of this address is in the course booklet, and in a moment downstairs we will begin our discussion of Sam Wells' ideas for those in the building. There is steps down the aisle or step-free access via Hay Hill. Thank you.